Welcome to another episode of the G20 Global Land Initiative podcast, where we explore innovative ideas and impactful projects driving land restoration and sustainable development worldwide. Today, we are honored to have Ms. Cornelia Meyer, who is an energy expert and a media expert. Her areas of interest are economics and economic development. So, Ms. Meyer, I've read a bit of your bio, and I see you're interested in issues of finance. The G20 Global Land Initiative has a big mandate, and that is to reduce degraded land by 50% by 2040. One of the 5 challenges we have identified that's limiting taking land restoration to scale is finance. This is your area. How do we do it? How do we mobilize the finances?
You're very right in identifying finance as the big problem, because when we look at land restoration and going against land degradation, of course you need the governments for that, but you need the local governments and you need actually the farmer. If you look at it, about nearly 50% of all land is highly arid, and 50% of livestock and 50% of crops produced on that land, and about 33% of the global population live on that land. So this affects billions. But a lot of these things are sort of looked at, especially when you look at G20, when you look at the big multilateral institutions, look at things from a very macro perspective. But in the end, we always come back to the small farmer. In the end, we always come back to the people who live on the soil, whose livelihood is the soil. And again, I look at the developing world, and 80% of all food in developing countries is produced by the small farmer, and only 20% of finance go there. So this was a long intro. But where I see this going is we really need to work with the small farmers and with the people dealing with land restoration, and we need to find financing mechanisms that work for them. It won't be the big banks. It won't be the big multilateral institutions. They can give, framework agreements. They can do technical assistances on how to make it work. But in the end, we come back to things that are led by microfinancial institutions and by civil society institutions who can give the money, because it's not much money per person, to the person who does the land restoration.
Okay. So I do agree with that. And coming from a farming family myself, it was not always the case that we got that financing. So one of the things as the G20 we've come up with is, finding who is the middle person between farmers and banks. Because for banks, it's too much administrative work. For farmers, they don't understand the banking language. So we're working as a G20. One of the groups we're looking at, it's young people who are working in the interface between banks and farmers and developing projects, which we're calling startups. I think people understand startups. They're providing that framework. How well are they being financed, or what are the challenges for them, and how can they get financed?
Well, that's actually very good. I think it's a very good approach, because they're the daughters and the sons of the small farmer. So they understand what the needs of the small farmer are. And they're also people we want to keep on the land. Because if everybody leaves the land, the cities like Cairo, cities like Nairobi, cities like Lagos can't be fed anymore, because 80% of their food comes from the small farmer. So in order to do that, you need to work with them. My advice would be for them to work with institutions that provide microfinance. Like, for instance, the Arab Gulf Fund, the Ag Fund, has 5 microfinance funds, and they very much go down to the level of the farmer. So my advice would be for them to work with institutions that are sort of between the big guys and the banks and the small guys who can also give them the technical assistances and teach them what the risk acceptance criteria of these microfinance institutions are. So I think there's no way around working with institutions who can help. And I would go for the institutions who understand that what we are dealing with is the small farmer. And I would also go with institutions who can listen. And I see, especially in this world, the Arab Coordination Group, where we have the Islamic Development Bank in there, you have other institutions in there like the Ag Fund. I see these institutions being able to listen, going on the ground and listening. For instance, the Islamic Development Bank, and I would also push you towards that, they have a very good concept which is called reverse linkage. That's South-South cooperation. If I see something working in Uzbekistan, which is a member country, then it works at that level. I can see whether it could work in Nigeria, which is also a member country. So I would urge these young people to reach out to institutions who are willing to listen, and who are willing to deal with the more at the grassroots level than the very big institutions are.
Okay. What are the other models for startups? So I think working with banks is one, but I think there are different kinds of investors as well. What other investment models exist that young people can tap into?
Well, I think another thing that I would look at is, Fintech is I happen to be on the board of the Middle East North Africa Fintech Association. And Fintech is another thing I would look at because there's technology can help us, get a lot. And Fintech can help with crowdfunding. I think crowdfunding is a very good idea. If you have an institution which can go out to families in rich and poor countries, to try and crowdfund, if many families give $5 each, you soon have a few $1 million, and that can be used. So I would leverage technology, I would leverage institutions, and I would never ever forget that what we are dealing with is the people on the ground, because without them we won't get it done.
Right. Okay. I think there's space for that as well. In terms of the G20, one of the things we are looking at and interested in is a lot of this work has been done, freely, with volunteer funds. What are the opportunities for turning it into business? Because we are seeing very interesting projects coming from young people, but they need an industry around it. How do we bring along the finance sector so that they begin to see this as a viable commercial business?
And you're very right. I mean, nothing succeeds like success, right? And if you have a business success, then people will want to do it. There again, I would look at models like crowdfunding and so on to see how this can be sustainable, because it needs to be sustainable, but where we have to be careful and we have to be clear. Big time investors, they want to see certain returns. We will not see those returns. So we need to have the compassionate investor who is willing to live with a little bit less of a return. I would also look at philanthropy, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Milken Institute and things like that, because philanthropists can help get these things started and can also, especially, when they come from big business, they can help guide them towards making things financially sustainable.
So I have one last question for you. Land restoration, the question I keep asking myself, what is true? What is likely to happen when you restore land? What is the one thing you can say, if you restore land, this is actually going to happen?
Well, that's very good. And I guess how you restore land is a problem. But if the land is restored and can yet again become agricultural land, people will be able to earn their living from selling crops in the markets. It's another thing, one needs to make market access easier. But you're dealing with perishable goods, so you need to be careful on how you do that. But you bring them to market so people can live with it. And also desertification is a real danger. So you take the danger of desertification again, right? This is the UN Convention to combat desertification. So that's what you're doing when you restore land.
Thank you very much. We come to the end of another issue of the Land Talks, and stay tuned. Thank you so much, Dr. Meyer, for being with us this evening.
Thank you very, very much for having me.